So, you've made a mistake in your toxic workplace and you're thinking about whether you should tell about it or not. Welcome to Hostile Territory, and in this video, we'll be talking about this topic exactly. Just like many things, in a toxic workplace, you have to think twice when doing almost anything, and it especially goes for telling about your mistakes. Why? You'll see in this video, so stay tuned.
Hostile territory.
Before we start, I must make one thing crystal clear. What you're going to hear in this video applies only to toxic and hostile workplaces. As mentioned in many of my previous videos, toxic workplaces are a specific working environment, and they are full of bad situations, rudeness, sometimes hostile behavior, sometimes yelling. People set all kinds of traps for you, and if you don't keep your back against the wall, you can get yourself into big trouble. Hence this video, to show you what happens if you approach telling about a mistake in the wrong way in a toxic workplace. But if you work in a good company where you have good conditions, good supervisors, you have good bosses or a boss, you have good relations with your coworkers and your colleagues, then be sure to tell about the mistake immediately. Especially if it's a big and costly mistake, and especially if it can cost other people down the line. Be sure to go to your supervisor, to your boss, whichever person is above you. Tell your coworkers if needed. The main point is for them to know about the mistake as soon as possible. Now, the first thing you should do if you made a mistake in a toxic workplace is not to tell anybody. Not your coworker, especially not your boss, not your supervisors, nobody. Keep it to yourself. After this, make a good assessment of the mistake. So see what the volume of the mistake is. What are the consequences? Are there any costs related to it? Will there be any consequences to other people, and who those people are? Will there be consequences to clients and their interests? And, just make a good assessment of that and react according to that. If you've made a minor mistake, which will not impact that much, which will not damage anyone that much, which will not cause that much problems, and especially if nobody's gonna see it, then do not tell anyone. Be quiet, be silent, and just forget about it, But if you see that it's gonna be a huge damage, that someone's gonna have huge damage, despite the fact that they may be plotting against you and everything else, if you're gonna see especially that the mistake is gonna make a huge cost to the company, and down the line you may have legal problems, with the supervisors in your company and so on, go and tell about the mistake immediately. In any case, you're going to be fired. It's just sooner or later. Go and tell about the mistake. Who knows? Perhaps they'll forgive you. Perhaps you'll pay for that mistake later down the line. By doing this, at least you will be safer. You're the one who told about the mistake on time. If you sit on it and don't tell anybody, and if they track you down the line, you're going to be in big trouble. After making that assessment, you decide to be quiet on the mistake. You're not going to tell anybody. Well, there is one thing I must warn you if you have this issue at all. And that is to get out of your head any kind of moral issue or issue with your consciousness. I hope I use the right term, pardon my bad English. Lots of people have a problem with this. So the scenario goes something like this. You make the mistake, you go home, and then it starts clicking in your head. Did I do the right thing? Should I have told my boss about the mistake? Should I have told my coworkers? Then you go to spend time with your family, and it's the same thing. Then you go to some sports occasion, and for instance, and it's the same thing, and the list goes on. Get rid of this. In a toxic workplace, there is no such thing as morality or consciousness. Once you've made the assessment, that's it. Trust yourself, and I think everything will be okay. But what happens if you've made the assessment and decided to tell about the mistake, to tell your boss, to tell your supervisors, tell your coworkers, and so on? Well, in a toxic workplace, there is a sort of procedure how to do this. The last thing you would want to do is to run to your boss and say, "Oh my God, I made a huge mistake. Oh my God, what am I gonna do?" and show despair, and present yourself like some sort of incapable and incompetent person that doesn't know how to do his or her job. Avoid that at all costs. Toxic bosses, toxic people cannot wait enough to see this, okay? It's a holiday for them. Rather do this. Go to the boss and say in clear, strict terms what happened. No beating about the bush. No, boss, I'm sorry. Sorry this, sorry that. Go have a firm stance. We've talked about this in previous videos. Have a firm stance. Look your boss in the eye and just say, I did that and that. I'm sorry, it happened. What can we do to fix it? Another thing I would like to mention, which is, in my opinion, sleazy, when the mistake happens, there is another approach to telling about it, and that is the manipulative way. I like to call it sugarcoating. So when you make the mistake, try to think about how to present that mistake in a certain way. If your boss is really bad, if he's really toxic, if he's really narcissist, we've talked about these people in my previous video. If you want to avoid a conflict, if you want to try and avoid getting fired, then sugarcoat the problem. Say, well, it happened like this, it happened like that, the circumstances were such, the guy called me, I forgot to do this, what can I do? These things happen, and so on. From what I've seen, my coworkers did those things. Let's say 8 out of 10 times they got themselves out of trouble easily. Although in my case, the coworkers had protection from the boss and from the supervisor, so it's worth mentioning. Simply, if you see that the situation is such that you can, think about not going directly, but perhaps presenting the problem in another way. Another very, very sleazy tip, take it with a grain of salt and don't use it always. Best not use it at all, but I must mention it, since I've seen my coworkers get out of trouble with this tip very successfully, and that is to involve others in your mistake. For instance, you made the mistake and then you start involving other people. For instance, I didn't know those were the papers I got. I have no idea. Then it wasn't my shift. It was the other person's shift. I really don't know. But in fact, you do know that it's your mistake. I've seen this many times. And again, just like with the previous sleazy tip, man, 8 out of 10 times it is simply successful. The hunters for the mistake, especially if it's a big one, lay off the back of the one who actually made the mistake and go and hunt that person who probably didn't have anything to do with it. But again, do this only if push comes to shove, okay? If you're really in trouble, and do this if someone sets you up with something to get yourself out of trouble. Otherwise, if you can, just avoid it. It's bad business. The last tip is, what if you have to apologize? So you told about the mistake in one way or the other, and now you have to say sorry for what you've done. Lots of people, especially your boss in a toxic workplace, and especially a narcissistic boss, will ask this of you. Lots of times, bosses and supervisors will use this as a show and tell for other workers. What will happen if they make a mistake? They will use your mistake to solidify their reputation as a despot in the workplace, and the list goes on. But even in this bad place, even in this place where you have to lower your ego, where you have to crawl like a snake on the ground, there is one thing you can do. We've talked about this in lots of our previous videos. At least have a stance. Have a firm stance, and don't take any of those mistakes to heart. Just say, I'm sorry, I hope it won't happen again, my bad, and that's it. Don't go into whining, don't go into crying, God forbid, don't go into any kind of trip like that. Just say it, and possibly say it in a way that everybody sees, including your boss, that you really don't care, that you don't care about the boss, about the company, about the mistake, and that's it. Say it in a way that you just fulfilled the form. This will enable you one important thing. Again, you will save face, you will keep your reputation if you have any, despite you making the mistake, and believe it or not, you will hurt the reputation of your boss to some extent. Now, all of the tips you heard come from my personal experience from my previous toxic and hostile workplace. If you watched my testimonial video, you'll see what happened to me during 12 long years of working in that kind of place. And besides the bad behavior and attitudes from my coworkers, there was one more big problem. That problem was that in that line of work, mistakes were sort of forbidden. Nobody talked about this, nobody admitted it, but it's enough to say that when you're doing something that's even not really important, Lots of times you'll hear your supervisor say, check, double check, watch what you're doing, please don't make a mistake. If you made a mistake, there were legal and financial consequences, and the financial consequences were often paid out of your own pocket. So, this was the line of work I was in. I saw this very early when I started working after a couple of months, and I started to devise a system to start to avoid those mistakes. I got this pretty good system that saved me hundreds of times from trouble. Not only my mistakes, but the mistakes of my coworkers. I'm proud to say that after doing thousands and thousands and thousands of cases, I only had 5 mistakes on my behalf. These 5 mistakes were almost not worth mentioning. But on the other hand, I had coworkers, and again, take this all with a grain of salt. I do not want to badmouth anybody or say that I was perfect and they were, the bad guys, but these are just the facts, so, take it or leave it. These people made huge mistakes. My boss made huge mistakes, his mistress made humongous mistakes all the time, and the third coworker was a person who oftentimes made mistakes that were out of this world. It was beyond comprehension. And this started to show in the line of work. But again, if you watched my previous videos, both of my coworkers had protection from the boss. The woman coworker was a mistress with the boss, and the other coworker was their best man. I don't know how to call it differently. So most of those mistakes were not seen by the head office. I think if they were, those people would get laid off in an instance. But never mind that. There I saw how people get themselves out of those mistakes and swindle out of problems. I had the system I made, and that was my only protection, okay? These people had coverage from the boss, but when even the boss didn't have the power to get them out of problems, then they would sit and sort of get themselves out of that. And this is where most of the tips I told you regarding sugarcoating and everything else come from. This was simply amazing to watch. The level of manipulation, the level of distorting facts, the level of trying to put some of those mistakes into my lap and everything else was astounding. I'll tell you one more thing. I had a couple of calls where people asked me, was that true? Did you make perhaps the mistake, and so on? And all that I can say is that that system works. These people did not get any kind of reprimand whatsoever. Perhaps if the boss didn't cover them and if the mistakes happened for the 100th time, someone would notice and do something. But, these people every time got out of it without any kinds of problems. And I'm talking about mistakes with thousands of euros of consequences. In the end, I can tell you this regarding mistakes. If you're alone in a toxic workplace, if you don't have any affection or relations with the coworkers, if your boss is really giving you a hard time, the best thing you can do for yourself is to avoid making a mistake, if that's possible. This way, you will not owe anyone nothing, and you will not put yourself through a certain situation. If you can't do this, then be very careful, again, how you present the mistake, be very careful about how you talk about the mistake, and be very careful about who you tell the mistake to. And of course, if the mistake is not big, if it's not gonna cost anybody, shut up, don't tell anybody about it. And finally, if you're a person who can manipulate your way out of a mistake, I don't want to be some sort of righteous judging person, but always think about the consequences that it could have on other people. Always think about the consequences it could have to the company. And if they are big, I would avoid this. But if you can manipulate yourself out of trouble without doing all of these things, without damaging anybody, why not give it a try? So, that's it for this time. I hope this video helps. Again, if you work in a good company, do not do any of this. Do not listen to any of this video. Simply tell about the mistake and everything will be just fine. Trust me, however big the mistake is. But if you work in a toxic and hostile workplace, be very, very careful. Otherwise, you may lose your job. You may get into debt to your boss. You may have financial consequences. You may get yourself into a trap. You may have problems when leaving the company and so on. So whenever you make a mistake, think about it and then talk. Thanks for watching. Thanks for your time. Please like and subscribe. It's a huge help for what we're doing. See you hopefully in the next video.